When Marcus Washington walked into Pinnacle Investments wearing a delivery uniform, no one suspected the man they were openly mocking would become their boss by morning, and their judge, jury, and potential executioner by afternoon. The gleaming offices of Pinnacle Investments sparkled in the morning light, all sleek glass, chrome, and expensive art adorning the walls. Marcus Washington, a 40-year-old black man dressed in a crisp, professional delivery uniform, stood patiently in the lobby, holding a small package and a tablet for signatures. The receptionist, a young white woman in her early 30s, barely looked up from her computer as Marcus approached the desk. "Deliveries go through the back entrance," she said dismissively, her tone making it clear she had no interest in giving him any further attention. "I'm here to see Richard Harmon," Marcus replied calmly. "I have a 10 a.m. appointment." The receptionist's eyebrows shot up in obvious skepticism as she looked him up and down, taking in his uniform with unconcealed disbelief. "You have an appointment with the CEO?" she asked, not bothering to hide her doubt. Marcus nodded politely, maintaining his professional demeanor despite her rudeness. "Yes, ma'am. If you could just let him know I'm here." The receptionist sighed dramatically before picking up her phone, clearly expecting to be told she should send the delivery man away. Down the hallway, a group of young executives in expensive suits emerged from a conference room, laughing and talking loudly. They spotted Marcus waiting by the reception desk and exchanged amused glances. One of them, Brad Thompson, a 32-year-old vice president known for his arrogance, nudged his colleague and whispered loudly enough to be heard, "Looks like someone's lost. The service entrance is around back, buddy." His friends snickered, not bothering to lower their voices as they continued making comments about Marcus's presence in their prestigious lobby. The receptionist hung up the phone, her expression shifting from dismissive to confused. "Mr. Harmon says to send you right in," she said, sounding thoroughly perplexed. She pointed toward the executive elevator. "Top floor, end of the hall." Marcus thanked her politely, ignoring the surprised stares from the group of executives as he walked confidently toward the elevator. Brad and his friends watched in disbelief, their laughter fading as they tried to make sense of why a delivery man would be granted a personal meeting with their CEO. Richard Harmon's corner office offered a spectacular view of the city skyline. The 65-year-old CEO stood as Marcus entered, greeting him with a warm handshake and genuine smile. "Marcus, good to see you. Thanks for coming by on such short notice." The two men embraced like old friends, leaving Richard's assistant standing in the doorway with a bewildered expression. "Can I get you some coffee?" Richard asked, gesturing to the plush chairs by his desk. Marcus nodded gratefully, setting down the package he'd been carrying. "The board documents are all here," Marcus said, tapping the package. "I wanted to deliver them personally given their importance." Richard nodded appreciatively as he examined the contents. "Always thorough, Marcus. That's why I value your input so much." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on business strategies and market projections with a comfortable familiarity that suggested years of professional respect. Richard's assistant returned with coffee, her earlier confusion now replaced with curious interest as she observed the obvious rapport between the two men. Meanwhile, Brad and his colleagues had gathered in the break room, still discussing the strange sight of a delivery man being escorted to the CEO's office. "Maybe he's Harmon's nephew or something," suggested one, working his way up from the bottom. Another laughed. "More likely he's delivering Harmon's lunch." Brad shook his head. "Whatever it is, he doesn't belong here. This place has standards." They continued their mockery, unaware that every word was being overheard by Melissa Chen, the company's HR director, who stood quietly by the coffee machine, her expression growing increasingly concerned. Back in Richard's office, the CEO leaned forward with a serious expression. "So, have you made your decision?" he asked Marcus. "The board is eager to know." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the view from the office. "I have," he replied. "I'll accept the position, but on one condition." Richard raised an eyebrow inquiringly. "I want complete autonomy to reshape the company culture," Marcus continued. "What I've seen today only confirms what you've been telling me about the problems here." Richard sighed and nodded. "You have my full support. Whatever changes you deem necessary." The next morning, all employees of Pinnacle Investments received an urgent email requesting their presence in the main conference room at 9 a.m. Rumors swirled throughout the building as people filed in, the large room quickly filling to capacity. Brad and his friends arrived late, taking positions near the back wall with casual disinterest. "Probably another pep talk about quarterly targets," Brad whispered to his colleague. "I have actual work to do." The room fell silent as Richard Harmon walked to the front, his expression uncharacteristically sullen. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began. "I have an important announcement to make. After 30 years as CEO of this company, I've decided it's time for me to step down." A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs of shock and speculation. Richard raised his hand for silence. "I'm not leaving the company entirely. I'll be moving to a position on the board, focusing on long-term strategy. But day-to-day operations will be handed over to my successor, effective immediately." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to hear who would be taking the reins of the billion-dollar investment firm. Richard smiled and gestured toward the door. "I'd like to introduce you to the new CEO of Pinnacle Investments." The door opened and Marcus Washington walked in, now dressed in an impeccable tailored suit that exuded authority and confidence. Brad's jaw literally dropped, his face draining of color as he recognized the man he'd mocked just yesterday. Richard continued speaking as Marcus took his place at the front of the room. Marcus Washington brings 20 years of experience in financial leadership, most recently as CFO of our biggest competitor. His track record of ethical leadership and exceptional returns makes him the perfect choice to lead Pinnacle into the future. Marcus stepped forward, his commanding presence instantly drawing all eyes in the room. "Thank you, Richard. I'm honored to take on this role," he began, his voice clear and authoritative. "I spent the past month quietly observing this company, getting a feel for its strengths and weaknesses." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Yesterday, I visited as a delivery man, which gave me invaluable insights into the company culture." Brad shifted uncomfortably against the wall, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. "What I saw concerned me deeply. Arrogance, disrespect, elitism. These are not the values that build successful companies." We see Marcus Washington fully embracing his authority as the new CEO of Pinnacle Investments. The meeting room scene serves as a public revelation of not just his new position, but also his leadership philosophy. Marcus doesn't waste any time in addressing the toxic culture he observed during his undercover visit as a delivery man. His approach is direct but measured. He's not acting out of pure revenge, but rather using this moment as an opportunity to reshape the company's values and set clear expectations for behavior moving forward. The use of the security footage is particularly significant as it transforms what was previously a private act of discrimination into a public moment of accountability. By displaying the footage on a large screen for all employees to see, Marcus eliminates any possibility for Brad and his colleagues to deny their actions or minimize their significance. This public exposure serves multiple purposes. It holds the offenders accountable. It sends a clear message to other employees about unacceptable behavior. And it establishes Marcus as a leader who values transparency and isn't afraid to address difficult issues head-on. The scene also reveals Marcus's leadership style. He doesn't immediately fire the offenders, which would have been within his rights. Instead, he offers them a choice that serves as both consequence and potential redemption. This approach demonstrates wisdom and strategic thinking, as it transforms punishment into an opportunity for growth and learning. By offering Brad and his colleagues the option to work in customer service, a department they previously looked down upon. Marcus creates a path for them to develop empathy and gain perspective on the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their perceived status. The reduction in compensation that accompanies this probationary period addresses the financial privilege that often insulates higher-level employees from the consequences of their actions. By aligning their pay with their new positions, Marcus ensures that they experience the full reality of working in a role they previously disrespected. This financial consequence makes the lesson more impactful and forces them to confront their biases about the value of different types of work within the organization. The reactions of Brad, James, and Peter to this ultimatum reveal much about their characters. Their shock and horror at the prospect of working in customer service further exposes their elitism and reinforces the necessity of Marcus's intervention. The fact that they consider this option so terrible highlights exactly why this experience is necessary for them. They have fundamentally misunderstood the dignity and importance of all roles within the company. Marcus's cool professionalism during this confrontation stands in stark contrast to his treatment when he was perceived as a delivery person. While Brad and his colleagues were openly contemptuous of someone they thought was beneath them, Marcus maintains his composure and treats them with the basic respect they failed to show him. This juxtaposition highlights the difference between true leadership and the hollow authority that comes merely from title or position. When Brad attempts to dismiss his behavior as just joking around, Marcus's response cuts to the heart of the issue. By challenging Brad's claim that his mockery wasn't personal, Marcus forces him to confront the dehumanizing nature of judging people based on their perceived position. This moment represents a direct challenge to the unconscious biases that often go unexamined in corporate environments. The psychological impact on Brad and his colleagues is profound. They are experiencing a complete reversal of the power dynamic they're accustomed to, forcing them to confront not just the consequences of their actions, but also the fragility of the privilege they've taken for granted. Their careers, which they believed were secure based on their positions and connections, are suddenly hanging by a thread, dependent entirely on their ability to demonstrate fundamental human decency. The HR director's presence during this meeting adds institutional weight to Marcus's decision. It signals that this isn't just a personal vendetta, but an official company action with proper documentation and oversight. This detail is important because it establishes that Marcus is working within proper channels, using his authority appropriately rather than abusing it. By establishing clear consequences and expectations, Marcus creates the conditions necessary for genuine change. The ultimatum forces Brad and his colleagues to make a conscious choice about their future at the company, which is the first step toward authentic transformation. Rather than simply punishing them and moving on, Marcus establishes a framework for monitoring and evaluating their growth over time. The reckoning extends beyond just these three individuals. The public nature of the confrontation ensures that the entire company understands the new standards of behavior. Every employee who witnessed the meeting now knows that disrespect will not be tolerated, regardless of one's position in the company hierarchy. This ripple effect is crucial for the broader cultural transformation that Marcus aims to achieve. The complex racial dynamics at play. As a black executive taking over a predominantly white company with apparent issues of elitism and discrimination, Marcus must navigate carefully. His approach balances accountability with opportunity for growth, avoiding the potential pitfall of being dismissed as driven by personal vendetta. Instead, he frames the issue in terms of company values and professional standards, making it clear that respect is a business imperative, not just a social nicety. The reckoning represents a moment of truth not just for Brad, James, and Peter, but for the entire company. It asks a fundamental question: what kind of workplace do we want to be? By directly confronting the disrespect he experienced, Marcus forces everyone to examine their own behavior and assumptions. The public nature of this confrontation ensures that no one can pretend these issues don't exist or that they won't be addressed. The options Marcus presents, termination or probation in customer service, reflect two different approaches to addressing workplace misconduct. The first is simple removal of the problem, while the second is a more nuanced approach that believes in the possibility of redemption through experience and reflection. By offering both options, Marcus demonstrates both firmness and compassion, a balance that will define his leadership style moving forward. The difference between Brad's desperate apology and genuine remorse is another important element of this section. His initial response is motivated by fear of consequences rather than genuine understanding of the harm caused by his actions. This highlights the difference between compliance motivated by fear and true transformation motivated by empathy and understanding, a distinction that will become important in the subsequent sections of the story. The reckoning also represents a moment of personal triumph for Marcus. Though he maintains his professional demeanor, this confrontation allows him to reclaim his dignity after the humiliation he experienced. By revealing himself as the CEO and directly addressing the disrespect he faced, he transforms what could have been a merely painful experience into a powerful catalyst for change. This represents a reclaiming of narrative control that is often denied to victims of discrimination. The specific mention of the customer service department is significant because it represents work that is essential but often undervalued. By requiring Brad and his colleagues to spend time in this department, Marcus forces them to recognize the importance of roles they previously dismissed. This assignment isn't arbitrary. It's specifically designed to address the exact form of elitism they displayed. Working directly with customers will require them to develop the empathy and respect they've been lacking. The threat of termination hanging over their probationary period ensures that their behavior change isn't just for show. They know they're being watched and evaluated, which creates external motivation for compliance. However, the 6-month timeframe is long enough that maintaining a facade would be difficult. Any genuine transformation would need to come from internal change, not just performance for observers. The specificity of the consequences, the reduction in pay, the change in position, the 6-month timeline, demonstrates Marcus's careful consideration. This isn't a reactive punishment, but a thoughtfully designed intervention aimed at creating specific outcomes. It shows his sophistication as a leader who understands that meaningful change requires more than just words or short-term consequences. The reckoning also sets up the narrative tension for the remainder of the story. Will Brad and his colleagues accept the opportunity for growth, or will they reject it? Will they be able to change their perspectives and behaviors, or will they remain stuck in their elitist mindset? This tension drives the reader's interest in the subsequent sections of the narrative. By choosing to set the consequences in the context of continued employment rather than immediate termination, Marcus creates a situation where the entire company will witness the process of accountability and potential transformation. This public aspect extends the impact of the reckoning beyond the immediate parties involved, turning it into a living example of the company's new values in action. The conclusion of this section, with Brad, James, and Peter left to consider their options, represents a moment of suspended decision. Their futures hang in the balance, dependent on choices they must now make. This suspension creates a natural transition to the next section of the story, where we'll see the consequences of those choices play out. The reckoning ultimately represents the fulcrum point of the narrative, the moment when the story pivots from establishing the problem to beginning to resolve it. It's the point where Marcus fully steps into his power and sets in motion the changes that will transform both individual lives and the company culture as a whole. The public nature of this confrontation ensures that this isn't just a private matter between a few individuals, but a defining moment for the entire organization. 6 months later, the atmosphere at Pinnacle Investments had undergone a remarkable transformation. Under Marcus Washington's leadership, the company had implemented comprehensive diversity and inclusion training, revised hiring practices to eliminate bias, and established a zero-tolerance policy for workplace disrespect. The results were beginning to show, not just in employee satisfaction surveys, but in the company's performance, with client retention up 15% and new business acquisition exceeding targets by a significant margin. Marcus's approach had proven that respect and profitability could go hand in hand. In the customer service department, Brad Thompson sat at his desk, handling a call with a patience and attentiveness that would have been unrecognizable to his former self. The past 6 months had been the most humbling experience of his life, forced to perform a job he had once considered beneath him. Yet surprisingly, he had discovered aspects of the work that he found fulfilling, particularly the opportunity to solve real problems for grateful clients. His supervisor, a woman who had been in customer service for 15 years, and whom Brad would never have acknowledged in his previous role, had become a respected mentor. Marcus observed Brad's progress from his office, reviewing the performance reports that showed consistent improvement in both his work quality and interpersonal skills. James had quit after 2 weeks, unable to adjust to his new position, while Peter had struggled initially but eventually found his footing. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Brad, curious to see if the transformation he'd observed in the reports was genuine. When Brad entered the office, the difference from the arrogant executive of 6 months ago was striking. He carried himself with a quieter confidence, making respectful eye contact as he greeted Marcus. "Your probationary period ends today," Marcus began, gesturing for Brad to take a seat. "I've been reviewing your performance." Brad nodded, his expression serious. "I know I still have a lot to learn," he said, surprising Marcus with his humility. "These 6 months have changed how I see things. I used to think respect was something you earned with a title or salary. Now I understand it's something everyone deserves, regardless of their position." Marcus studied him thoughtfully, looking for any sign that this was merely a performance to regain his former status. But Brad's sincerity seemed genuine. Marcus leaned back in his chair, having made his decision. "There's an opening in our client relations department. It would be a step up from customer service, but still client-facing. The team needs someone who understands the importance of treating everyone with dignity." Brad's eyes widened slightly, hope creeping into his expression. "Are you offering me the position?" Marcus nodded. "Consider it a fresh start. Not at the level you were before. You'll need to rebuild trust for that, but a path forward." Brad accepted gratefully, understanding that he'd been given a second chance that many wouldn't have offered. 1 year later, the annual company gathering took place on the rooftop garden of Pinnacle's headquarters, with the entire staff celebrating a record-breaking year. Marcus Washington stood at the podium, acknowledging the collective effort that had made their success possible. "A year ago, I challenged us to prove that a company built on respect could outperform one built on hierarchy and elitism. Today, the results speak for themselves." The crowd applauded enthusiastically, pride evident on their faces as Marcus shared impressive growth statistics that had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Among the crowd, Brad listened attentively, standing with his team from client relations. The past year had continued his personal transformation as he discovered talents for relationship building that had previously been overshadowed by his arrogance. He had become one of the strongest advocates for the company's new culture, sometimes sharing his own story as a cautionary tale during training sessions for new hires. The humiliation of that day when Marcus revealed himself had evolved into a profound gratitude for the wake-up call that had changed his life's trajectory. As the formal presentation concluded and people mingled, enjoying food and drinks, Brad found himself face-to-face with Marcus. "Congratulations on the Johnson account," Marcus said, referring to a major client Brad's team had recently secured. "Your proposal was excellent." Brad thanked him sincerely. "I wouldn't be here without the lesson you taught me," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you just fired me that day." Marcus smiled thoughtfully. "Second chances are powerful when people are willing to learn from them. Not everyone is." Brad nodded in agreement, thinking of James, who had left the company bitter and unchanged. The evening concluded with Marcus raising a toast to the entire company. To Pinnacle, where we judge people not by appearances or titles, but by character and contribution. As glasses were raised across the rooftop, the skyline of the city glittering behind them, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a humiliating lesson for a few had become a powerful example for many. Respect isn't just a moral imperative, it's good business. And sometimes, the person you dismiss today might be the person deciding your fate tomorrow.